Ukraine continues to fight for independence, for its territory and its people. Dr. Volodymyr Kravchenko, former director of CIUS, professor of history with the Department of History, Classics and Religion at the University of Alberta, and director of the Contemporary Ukraine Studies program with CIUS, joins us to reflect on the historical complexity of the borderlands. Dr. Kravchenko, tell us about the Ukrainian-Russian borderlands.
Within 10 minutes, it's not possible. I'm just kidding. So let us think about Ukrainian-Russian border. And I used to think it in terms of historical borderland. In terms of numbers, the border has a length of more than 2,000 kilometers. Just to compare, the Ukrainian-Russian border is not as long as, let us say, Kazakhstan-Russian border, or the border between Canada and the United States, which is the longest international border in the world. But the border issue, especially when it comes to Ukrainian-Russian border, is much more complicated phenomenon, which cannot be described in numbers only. Let me start with the theory, and don't be afraid. Our understanding of the border depends on what kind of border we are talking about. One should take into account that from historical perspective, borders are plastic, they are flexible, they are changeable. They used to change their configuration after a war. Any great European war resulted with the process of rebordering. Westphalian Peace of 1648, the Vienna Congress of 1815, the Paris Conference of after the World War I, and finally the Yalta Conference of 1945. Every time, new political landscape with new borders was a result of changing geopolitical situation. Simply put, new borders were established and maintained by brute force. That is why they have been called hard borders. They are visible, they are controlled, they are guarded, and you cannot cross them easily. However, in parallel with hard borders, historians operate with the term of soft borders or symbolic borders. They are less visible than hard borders, and they are closely associated with collective identity. Ideally, soft borders should coincide with hard borders. In the real life, it is hardly possible at all. People have multiple identities: political, religious, ethnic, cultural, and so on. For that reason, there is always a borderland, a territory with less defined borders, populated by the people with mixed or hybrid identities. It's a fluid and unstable zone of intensive interethnic and intercultural contacts. Now, what about Ukraine and Russia? Ukraine is a typical borderland. It's a land in between. Ukraine, due to its geography, always appeared in the epicenter of the, so to say, shatter zone of competing empires. At the same time, Ukrainian history is a history of many attempts to consolidate borderland, to transform it into a sovereign political entity. Most of such attempts failed. That is why Ukrainian hard borders rarely coincided with soft or symbolic borders. Ukraine, as well as Russia and all other post-Soviet countries, inherited from the Soviet Union administrative borders of the Soviet republics. Those borders were recognized as international borders of sovereign independent states. As a matter of fact, Ukrainian borders were recognized internationally even before that, after the Second World War, when Ukraine formally became a member of the United Nations. Those borders embraced almost all Ukrainian ethnic territory, but they were established during Soviet times. When the Soviet Union came to an end, everything associated with the Soviet project started losing its political legitimacy. From historical perspective, we are witnessing the next and perhaps the most important step in the long process of the dissolution and fragmentation of the Soviet-Russian Empire, along with its space and identity. Soviet Union embraced many peoples, those who were on the periphery, those who possessed strong sense of national identity. They simply got away immediately. Now they are parts of the European Union and NATO. I'm talking about 3 Baltic countries, of course. But Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, these 3 countries formed the core of the Soviet Union, its basic structure, its very foundation. And that core itself was inherited by the Soviet Union from the Russian Empire. In terms of identity, it was based on pre-modern, archaic discourse of the unity of East Slavic Orthodox peoples. In fact, there was no real border between Soviet Ukraine and Soviet Russia, simply because none of them was a real state. Therefore, during the Soviet times, it was a borderland. Post-Soviet countries started their nation-building process within the framework of the Soviet borders. However, Ukraine and Russia have been moving in the opposite directions. Russia attempted to re-establish Soviet hard borders and erase completely former inter-republican borders. Ukraine aimed to turn former Soviet borders into real national borders. The Ukrainian and Russian elites often operated with the same historical legacies and their respective symbols, but they interpreted, or rather reinterpreted them, absolutely differently. The former Soviet space and the former Soviet identity became nationalized by the both actors, but Russia was ahead of Ukraine on the road of nation-state building. Let us not forget about the role of war in the process of nation building. Any war is the most effective tool of national consolidation. Most of the modern nations were born during the war: France, Germany, Italy, and so on. Post-Soviet Russia is no exception. It was involved into several wars in the Caucasian region, Chechnya, Georgia, and even in Syria. Just one can recognize 3 main trends or topics in Russian post-Soviet national intellectual development. First, games with history, when the past has been reimagined in terms of Russian imperial glory. Second, military topics based on the Second World War and other wars, real or imagined, and criminal topic. These are 3 pillars of the Russian post-Soviet discourse of identity. Russia managed to reintegrate at least some of the former Soviet regions and even one republic into Russian new political and cultural space: Tatarstan, Chechnya, Transnistria, Abkhazia, Belarus, and now the Crimea and the most part of the Donbass. All of these territories, except for Chechnya, perhaps, have been the most Sovietized lands. Now they're becoming parts of the Russian imperial state building. Ukrainian nation-state building so far was, as Marta Dechok put it, change without movement and movement without change. It got a boost only in 2014 with the Russian annexation of the Crimea and part of the Donbass. Since that, we are witnessing a process of recasting of Ukrainian-Russian Soviet borderland into nationally defined hard border. Today, the borderline is in fact a moving front line. It has acquired also geopolitical and civilizational dimensions. However, those Western observers who still believe that Putin is motivated by geopolitical ambitions only are wrong. At bottom, it's all about identity, resentment, as well as personal and national phobias. And as such, the war has no rational justification. It started process of rebordering, repartition of the territory, and redistribution of the borderland population. People has been challenged with an exclusive choice of identification, either Russian or Ukrainian. There is no middle ground between them anymore. It's a difficult and painful process. Personal relations are broken, families are breaking up, generational conflict is in progress, and so on. Even though the new border between the 2 states and 2 nations will be established soon, as many people hope, it is not going to be stable, I am afraid. As long as Ukraine remains in the symbolic spaces of Sovietness and Imperial Russianness, it will be vulnerable without international support. But the formula of Ukrainian new identity is still to be discovered and established. One cannot simply throw out his or her history and change geography. They should be reimagined and incorporated into the new national narrative. That's all I can say about the topic.
Thank you. That's quite interesting. And we will see how things continue to play out and hope for the best for Ukraine. Thank you, Dr. Kravchenko, for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.